All right, Margaret, I'm going to turn to you next. Are you there?
I am, Jason. Hi.
How you doing?
I'm
We
good.
were we were talking beforehand, and I said we've had this conversation so many times. I asked you to catch me up on things. Talk to me a little bit first about maybe who your organization is, who they represent, and this issue that you guys have taken on, offshore aquaculture.
Absolutely. Happy to. So I presume you mean Stronger America through Seafood,
Yes.
which is a coalition of U.S. companies from across the seafood supply chain who came together in 2017 with a very narrow, specific mission. And that mission is to influence federal policies that will enable increased sustainable seafood production, primarily through aquaculture. And the reason we have focused so much on offshore is because there's a lot of activity in DC around offshore aquaculture, and there has been for decades, but we came to understand starting around 2016 that some efforts would be revived. So SATS has focused a lot on offshore because of the opportunity in Washington, and also because of the opportunity in general. The fact that the United States has this massive open ocean resource and remains a net importer of seafood to a huge degree. And we are bringing in farmed seafood. It's just not farmed in the United States. And we have no challenges at all with other forms of seafood production, including commercial harvesting or imported seafood. It's all completely necessary to provide the seafood needed for consumers here in the United States. But we saw a massively untapped opportunity offshore. And one of the biggest obstacles we identified to that opportunity happened to be a lack of a clear process for permitting offshore aquaculture. So that is the issue we are focused on. The group itself is comprised, I think it's a really unique group. In fact, I think that's one of the things that has made SATS so successful is it's a new cast of characters. It's a new voice for an issue that has been historically shouldered by a very small group of producers in the offshore space. So for years, when I first started as a fisheries lobbyist at NFI, back in 2005, 2006, I remember walking the Hill in support of the Bush administration's National Offshore Aquaculture Act with leaders like Don Kent, Neil Sims, and we're still working together today. But what SATS brings to the table is we bring it back from the coastline. So it's not just the producers, it's importantly the feed manufacturers. So Cargill, Ziegler, three of our newest members that we just welcomed this year are from the nutrition side. So Merck Animal Health, Wilbur Ellis, Benson Hill. We've partnered quite a bit with the American Soybean Association, organizations that are further back along the supply chain, but equally benefited by aquaculture. Other members that are probably more familiar with the group, Pacific Seafoods, for example, Taylor Shellfish, Red Lobster, of course, Cisco, the distribution company. Again, all kind of points along the supply chain to help elevate the message of just basic benefits we could reap from growing offshore aquaculture production here in the U.S.
All right, excellent. Well, it seems like what we talk about normally is the effort to get legislation passed. But in the previous administration, there were actually some things that happened in the administration that were positive for your efforts. Could you talk a little bit about some of the progress that was made under the previous administration, and then maybe cast us into where we are now?
Absolutely. Yes. So, and it was pretty crazy, Jason, because a lot of stuff happened at the height of the pandemic last year. And I think that was, and in fact, I know that was a result of very intense efforts from 2017 to 2019. And I think the piece you're referring to was the executive order on seafood competitiveness,
yeah,
which was issued by President Trump in, I want to say March of 2020. And that was the result of a lot of industry work over many, many years. That work predated the Trump administration, quite frankly. There was a lot of content in that executive order that had been hammered out over many years. It was the Trump administration that sort of put the final touch on it and got it out the door. But the most important part for SATS, of course, was the section on aquaculture, and it established a very clear priority for that administration around making clear a process for permitting offshore, reducing some of the interagency overlap, establishing NOAA as the lead agency through executive order to get the job done. Another big piece was the establishment of aquaculture opportunity areas. So within existing authority, the executive order enabled NOAA and empowered NOAA to move ahead with the process whereby they would identify, and I was listening to Annie's comments, and I sympathize. We have a lot of shared members. I sympathize with the work she's doing. But I think with aquaculture, we have to focus on siting, right? Identify areas within federal waters that will reduce conflict. There is so much space. Where can we locate these aquaculture operations in a way that won't impact commercial fishing or oil and gas or wind for that matter? So the agency is doing a lot of work on aquaculture opportunity areas as a result of that executive order. The other big win I'd say we had in the last Congress was introduction of bipartisan legislation. Again, at the peak of the pandemic, we had bipartisan legislation introduced in both the House and the Senate during an election year, right? I mean, the nation was in the midst of just deeply divided partisan politics, and yet seafood is the issue that rises to the occasion and manages to bring us together, which was fantastic. But we had legislation introduced called the Aqua Act, and the Aqua Act is the very important piece which establishes, without any question, the statutory authority of NOAA as an agency to oversee the regulation, enforcement, and permitting of offshore aquaculture. So those two things, the executive order, which empowered NOAA to begin doing what they could do, taking steps forward within existing statutory authority. That was really important. And then, of course, number two, federal legislation, which would strengthen, I think, the confidence of the industry to begin investing offshore. There's a lot of question as to the legality and certainty to operate without some sort of, I'll say, a Magnuson-Stevens for aquaculture. And fundamentally, that's what aqua is. We are not appropriately managed, by we, I mean aquaculture, under MSA. That is not the right framework for aquaculture. It's apples and oranges. We need an MSA, a very aspirational, including national standards, including goals for production, including robust enforcement. That is needed on the aquaculture side as well. So those two things were huge wins. I think you also asked Jason, and I just could go on and on, so you're going to have to like ding me or something.
No, I've been writing down questions, and I'm ready to jump in.
Wave your hands, because I'm going to get on a tangent, and it's just not going to stop. So what you asked initially, and I took forever to answer, of course, was where are we now with this new administration? And I think for many years, we really doubled down on the economics message, right? The opportunity, the jobs, the trade deficit. That was a huge issue for the Trump administration. We've got a bit of a different paradigm in Biden and in the Democratic-controlled Congress. One of their huge priorities is climate. This is a number one priority, and biggest challenge we have is getting seafood issues just recognized at all in the current political insanity that's happening in Washington. There are so many things moving, and I think all of your speakers on this panel might sympathize with this. We've got to get seafood, top billing, and we're having a difficult time. And I think as far as we can associate and amplify the climate benefits of seafood, we are going to have a much better chance being heard with the current political leadership. And the good news is that seafood is, no matter the production method, a far more sustainable form of animal protein production than a lot of our competitors. And no offense to the Cattlemen's Beef Association or the Turkey Council, but I would submit that seafood is quite beneficial in general when you're talking about climate benefits. So that's a message that we've really honed in on at Stronger America through seafood. And I'd love to work with your other panelists, and I have been able to quite a bit over the years, to help find unique ways to get seafood issues top billing with this current paradigm.
All right, I'm going to hit you with a number of questions now. I've been jotting them down as you were talking. Just background some of them. Right now, we don't have, do we have anywhere where we have a U.S. offshore aquaculture project in the works, being piloted? Anything?
We have, well, absolutely. There are in state waters quite a few operations underway. Offshore, however, is a different story. There is one farm in Hawaii, Open Blue, that is very, I think they are, I'm sorry, Blue Ocean Mariculture, not Open Blue, Blue Ocean Mariculture. I believe they're dual permitted by the state of Hawaii and the federal government. So they are very successful. They're kind of a model for what I think the future of U.S. seafood production could look like. There are other permits underway. So I mentioned at the beginning, Don Kent with Hubsea World Research Institute has been working for 20 years under the current paradigm to have a permit approved for growing yellowtail, I believe, off the coast of Southern California. They are still in the process. Neil Sims and his operation have a permit application underway in the Gulf for I believe, a pilot scale project. And there are several others. There's one off the coast of, again, in the Gulf, south of, I want to say, Panama City, that a company out of New York, Manna Fish Farms, is working on. There's a lot of things in the works, but in terms of those who've gotten across the finish line, it's very limited. And again, this is the obstacle. It's the lack of clarity, the lack of agency authority to get these permits done that is the biggest obstacle, I would say.
By contrast, if we were to look around the globe, do you see other countries with more prominent foreign offshore aquaculture facilities?
There's certainly a drive to do so. For example, China announced a couple years back their intent to throw out over 100 commercial scale offshore aquaculture operations. And we've got a lot of things underway in Norway. There's a lot of activity off the coast of South America. I mean, in general, Jason, the reality is the world is eating our lunch in terms of aquaculture production. We can either sit by and continue to allow our market to be dominated by products that are wonderful, but not produced by Americans, or we can get this legislation passed, get in the game, begin using the technology that we ourselves produced to begin with. We can begin using American farmed products to feed these fish. The ag community, particularly soybeans, they've got a market challenge right now with their exports. They are looking to grow more domestic markets for their products. Aquaculture is the perfect opportunity. So it's not just about the operations on the water. Jason, this is an entire supply chain issue, not to mention the demand for seafood we hope will increase very soon if some of our marketing efforts, which I think I can talk about later, are successful, which I think
yeah, we need to cover another topic. Why don't we go ahead and jump into that? I'm sorry, I got right over my head. I really want to cover this too. Talk to me about the Seafood Nutrition Council. How did you get into that, and what does it involve?
Well, I'm kind of smug about this, Jason, because I feel like I've had this opportunity, this privilege of helping with like the seafood offensive line, right? So we've got a lot of these fires that we're putting out, absolutely necessary in seafood. We place so much defense that it's difficult for organizations to think 50 years ahead. The National Seafood Council project, which is being run right now through the Seafood Nutrition Partnership, is one of those offensive line projects. They're identifying an intense need to market to American consumers the health benefits of seafood. And they think, and what we're doing right now is pulling together an industry coalition to help secure federal resources, significant federal resources, to launch effectively a generic seafood marketing campaign, which is relatively unprecedented, but very much needed, again, to increase demand for seafood at large. So for so many years, and another one of your panelists was kind of laughing, I think it was Leigh, about just the diversity of our community, of the seafood community.
Yeah.
But the area that we own in terms of messaging unequivocally is health. That, I think, is the unifying factor across seafood. We have to come together with one voice. If we're going to elevate our consumption, right now Americans eat on average 19 pounds per capita of seafood per year. Meanwhile, we're eating over 100 pounds per capita of red meat per year. I think in terms of the health impacts, the climate and environmental impacts, not to mean the economic impacts of seafood, we've got to do a better job. And the only way we can do that is through marketing and coming together with one voice. And we think the health message is the place to do that. So we're working in Washington to secure money to launch that program. We've got some heavy hitters on board: Gorton's, Trident, Rich Foods. NOAA themselves are very supportive behind the scenes of what we're trying to achieve here. Their Marine Fisheries Advisory Committee came out with a report last year around the need for a national seafood marketing effort. So S&P is simply picking up the baton and running with it and saying, what can we do to help? And so starting with some federal resources, I think, is number one.
The ag industry has a number of programs like this for ag products. Sort of the source behind Got Milk. What were some of the other ones? What was the beef
the
one?
Other way, meat, milk.
Yeah, the other, that was the pork thing. Yeah.
For dinner.
Now those were partially paid for, I thought, by the industry itself. Everybody had to chip in a certain number of dollars. Would this be something similar, or is this a totally different idea?
Totally different idea. The budget we're looking for is roughly $25 million per year from Congress for the first 5 years at least. And this is, again, we've got to bring the seafood community together. Those other programs, those commodity-based checkoff programs, are for very homogenized industries like chicken or beef. The seafood industry needs a hand up to get started. And so it was MAFAC's recommendation, and we would agree wholeheartedly that the federal government has an obligation based on all of the work that we've done over the years. They have an obligation and an opportunity to help us with this generic marketing, again, for the benefits that we've espoused. Listen, if Americans eat more seafood, we're going to have an extreme reduction in heart-related health problems, morbidities that we dealt with during COVID. I mean, seafood is the answer to a lot of the problems that this administration is focused on and having to deal with. Why not help support increased consumption to better our odds?
Where might we see the action on this in terms of this? Do you think this will come up as sort of a provision in a bill, or how will this move forward?
I think our first effort, Jason, is to secure appropriations. So there has been a good amount of willingness and interest on the part of particularly some U.S. senators who think that this is a great idea. And we're seeking just initially an influx of funds. There is discussion about a reauthorization of what was called the National Fish and Seafood Promotion Act of 1986, which does need to be updated. But I think a lot can be done in the meantime, because just like with MSA or Aqua, any of these big seafood authorization bills take a really long time to get across the finish line, and we need to move quickly.
Would NOAA oversee the program?
Yes.
Okay.
It would be our vision. And again, so S&P is not asserting their idea that they own this thing necessarily. We're just carrying the baton to the next level. But one idea would be that NOAA serve as a bit of a pass-through for a grant type program. But the key here is that this program needs to be one unified message to bring the industry together. Again, the competition is the other proteins. The vision is when you walk into the grocery store, we need to drive foot traffic to the seafood section of the grocery store. Once customers get to the seafood section, it's up to all of the other marketing programs to kick in and drive consumers to which specific species or harvest method or country of origin they're interested in. But we got to get them to the seafood section first and foremost. We got to get them to the seafood section of the restaurant menu. So get them on the surf, not the turf, if that makes sense.
I did want to ask Margaret a question real quick. Margaret, can I get you for a second?
I'm here.
This was a question I wanted to ask at the end, and I was worried we were going to run out of time, but if I can get it in. We were talking about offshore aquaculture and the opportunity and things that could be done and how it would help improve how much seafood we source domestically in the U.S. What do the opponents have against offshore aquaculture? What are their biggest issues?
That's a great question, Jason. I think a lot of the concerns are, personally, I feel that they are somewhat outdated at this point, in terms of the fact that technology is fast developing to address some of the concerns that have been expressed over time. I think big picture, we have a problem. We've got a population globally that's going to increase to 9, almost 10 billion by 2050. We've got a robust but well-managed commercial fishing sector that has specific guidelines they have to adhere to. In order to meet that growing global demand, we're gonna farm seafood, right? And that can either happen overseas where we have less benefits here locally and domestically, or we can leverage this need and fill the void ourselves. And we can do it with the best standards. We can do it with the best technology, and we can do it while employing Americans to get it done. You know what I'm saying? So I think a lot of the opposition has been around potential environmental impacts, many of which are being addressed both through siting and technology and improvements in the structure of net pens, for example, things like that. Feed efficiency, we're dealing with massively improved feed efficiency. By the day, these things are getting more efficient and better. And potential competition or interference with commercial fishing or other ocean-based uses. We very much hope and believe that those can be addressed through siting, through very specific siting surveys, which are occurring. So, it's going to have to be done. I think we have an opportunity to do it here and control our own destiny. And the challenges are being mitigated and can be mitigated.